Dr. Marchangisi here with your Science Moment. Today I'm going to talk about the tragedy of totalitarianism. One of the hidden or lesser understood tragedies of totalitarianism is that there's always a minority, and it could be a majority, very often it's a majority, that are keeping their heads down. They don't dare speak up. But the opponents of that totalitarian state, let's say the enemies of the totalitarian state, well, all that they're going to hear from are potentially the loud minority of voices that are pro-totalitarian. They're only going to hear the voices of the state. And so they're going to lump the entire population in with that vocal, strident, sort of authoritarian group that governs and oppresses the entire nation. Now, this is exactly what we find in all totalitarian states. Do we ever hear from the minority in North Korea? Do we ever hear their voices? Do we know whether there's 60, 70, 80% that are just keeping their heads down and saying, when is this nightmare going to end? I don't know the numbers, and neither do you, and you can't trust polls, right? So the experience, the viewpoint that I have, which is bringing you sort of the Iranian viewpoint, and the Iranians, we view ourselves in this situation as if we're Gazans, right? Gazans are being oppressed by the same sorts of folks that have oppressed the Iranians. These are Islamic radicals. It's the Islamic radicals that oppress Gazans and Iranians alike. And my family has been oppressed by the Islamic Republic of Iran for 45 years, and much of Palestine has been at various times oppressed by radical Islamists for that long and longer. But what we typically instead summarize these arguments for, as I said in my second video, I think since after October 7th, is that we lump it into, well, there's just the anti-Israel on the Israeli side, and then the poor Gazans who are being oppressed by Hamas end up in the same side as Hamas. And to Iranians, that's absurd. That's just like, okay, as soon as Iran was in a war and sent drones to Israel, does that mean that I should be pro-Iran now? Right? No, of course, the Iranians are still anti-Islamic Republic, and Israel has nothing to do with it. So the tragedy here is that the oppressed people of totalitarian states, and Gaza is a totalitarian state. You have a strident group of supporters who enforce, Hamas's viewpoints on the street as it occurs also in Iran, and the rest just keep their mouths shut. Now you can say, look, Mark, they voted. No, I've talked about this before. There was no free expression. There was no freedom for people to run that were not Islamists in 2005, 2006, whenever those one set of elections occurred that voted in Hamas. No one could vote against them. No one could appear and run against them, right? And once they got into office, they murdered the opposition. And there's been not even any faux elections since then. And the supposed polls, well, who's disproportionately likely to show up to polls done in a totalitarian state? If you are trying to keep your head down, you're going to come up with any excuse to avoid ever being seen to be involved in any kind of poll done by the AP or Reuters or whatever it might be, any of these sorts of polling folks that show up for polling. You're not going to show up for these things. And if you do show up, you do not believe that they're anonymous. Why should you believe they're anonymous? You're sitting there having conversations with a pollster in your family room. You don't trust that this is anonymous. Someone could after say, look, we think that you were saying the wrong kind of information, the wrong kind of feedback to these pollsters. You are going to toe the party line out of safety. You cannot trust the poll numbers. You cannot trust the supposed elections in totalitarian states like in Gaza. You have to presume that there's a tremendous minority, if not a majority. They don't want anything to do with Hamas. They don't want war with Israel. They just want a peaceful country, as do most people. This is why people, if they have the chance to leave Gaza, they do. Just as if they have the chance to leave Iran, they do. The chance to leave Afghanistan, they do. Muslims don't want Islamism. As a whole, they do not want Islamism. So there's multiple biases that convince people that the oppressed in these totalitarian states are part of the oppressor. Right? One is that these polls invariably are biased towards making it look like they support them. What you see on TV, on the streets, are disproportionately going to be the supporters because only they have the guts to show up. Anybody else who pokes their head up will be beaten down or their families killed. Right? And then both sides, in the larger debate with the enemy of the country, in this case Israel, well, a lot of Israelis, it's easier for them, if you're pro-Israel, to just lump Hamas and Gazans together. It's a much simpler story, and same if you are supposedly pro-Palestine. Well, let's just say all the Palestinians are the same as Hamas, and Hamas, they're freedom fighters, right? And so there's just one enemy and one good guy, Gaza versus Israel. These radical simplifications that both sides are motivated to make, and between the polls and the selection pressure, which ensures selection bias ensures that you only hear the side of the totalitarians, all of these things encourage the voices of the oppressed within these countries to not be heard. And that is another hidden tragedy of totalitarianism, that not only are you being oppressed top down by the state, not only are you being oppressed by your neighbors enforcing the righteous rules in the street, but the very supporters supposedly of you, if you're Gazan, as people saying, oh, we're pro-Palestine, end up supporting the very oppressors that oppress you, right? That's the tragedy. And that's what I'm daily pulling my hair out watching, because I see too little understanding of this on either side of the debate. And that was your science moment.